Welcome to the Teachers Talkin' podcast, hosted by Dustin and Ghazali Abdul Wahab. In this podcast, we discuss all things education and teaching, from innovative teaching methods to challenges to strategies and much, much more. In this discussion or roundtable-based podcast, we bring in educators from all around the world to talk about a variety of education topics so that we can support as many teachers as possible. We want this to be a place of inspiration, personal and professional development, and simply a place where we can elevate education together. Welcome to Teachers Talkin'. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Teachers Talkin'. I'm Dustin here with my co-host Ghazali, and we are excited to dive into another great conversation today. Today we are joined by Dr. Kevin Jennings. He is an educator with 15 years of experience, including 13 years in the classroom, and he's taught students from over 60 countries across the United States, South Korea, and Switzerland. Super cool. And his passions include research design, curriculum development, and most relevant to today's topic, game-based learning. And that's why today's episode is called Leveling Up Learning, Game-Based Teaching That Sparks Higher Order Thinking. We're going to be exploring the guiding question, how can game-based learning help students to unlock higher order thinking skills in the classroom? So, Kevin, before we jump in, could you just tell us a little bit more about your journey as an educator and what led you to focus your research on game-based learning?
Sure. Well, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate it. So my journey as an educator, you summed it up very nicely there in the beginning. So I started off teaching in the United States, down in the Villages, Florida, and I liked it, but something was still missing for me. So I moved abroad. I moved to South Korea, where I taught ELA for 2 years, and kind of the same thing. After 2 years, I was ready to move on. And then I moved to Switzerland, and I found this school called Liaison American School. And the school is awesome. I know Rob Barnett brought it up on your episode. But the key part of it for me was I had some awesome mentors. And I know Rob and I both benefited from the same mentor. His name is Dr. Paul Magnuson. And basically, he introduced this idea of passion projects to our school. And he created the Liaison American School Educational Research Department. And it really started by Paul and another boss that I had asking me if I wanted to do a research project. And just asking me to do something like that just initially gave me a huge boost of confidence, right? And this kind of started this cycle of, if I have a problem, I'm going to use that problem and I'm going to dive into it, and hopefully I can make it a strength. And that's kind of what the idea was at Liaison American School with the Educational Research Department. And so at LAS, I undertook a number of projects meant to, help different parts of the school along the way. And one of the things, and during this time, I was playing Dungeons and Dragons with some of my teacher friends after school. And pretty quickly we realized that there were a lot of commonalities between education and Dungeons and Dragons as we were playing, right? Lots of problem solving, lots of collaboration, lots of opportunities for leadership and things like this. And so because of that, the next project I undertook, I believe this was my 4th or 5th project at Liaison American School, was how to implement a tabletop role-playing game into a classroom. And fortunately, working at a boarding school and I was also teaching kind of like an experimental class, it gave me a lot of freedom to dive into things that I really loved. I love history, and I was a history teacher, so that was no problem. But I also loved research, and I also loved game-based learning. So I was able to really, kind of dive into it in an experimental way with one of my classes. And what I ended up doing is with that initial colleague, sorry, I'm pretty long-winded, sorry.
You're fine.
This is too much. One of my colleagues and I started to design game-based learning games or Dungeons and Dragons type games with real stories, right? Whether it be a legend or something, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, or Hernan Cortez landing in Mesoamerica. We took these events and we tried to turn them into games. And it was pretty successful, but I kind of knew that there was more, right? And I could get more out of it. And in just the way that some of the kids reacted and some of the teachers reacted and how positive it was, and kids were doing extra work when they didn't need to because it was satisfying to them to add to this game, and that to me is the best, when these kids are going out of their way to do extra work because they are thrilled about what they're talking about. And that research, plus the help of my mentor, as I mentioned, Paul Magnuson, I then signed up to do an EDD program in Charleston, a doctorate of education, in Charleston, South Carolina, where my family lives.
That's so awesome.
Thank you.
I'm now really excited to hear a lot more about where we're going with this.
Yes, it sounds very interesting. So perhaps you could tell us a bit more about your research. What did you find out from your research about game-based learning?
Sure. So when I started the doctorate in Charleston, the program was for educational leadership. However, when I got to the dissertation, which was like the last year and a half or so of the program, I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. And I had a long discussion with my mentor and a different mentor. And he basically just said, look, whatever you're going to research, this is likely to be what you're going to do for the rest of your life. So make sure it's something you love. And I'm really glad I had that conversation, because that's when I decided I was going to do something with game-based learning. When you're writing a dissertation, it has to be extremely specific. So my topic ended up being how to use games, or serious games, to forge higher order thinking skills, right? So skills like analysis, evaluation, creation, critical thinking. How can we do that? And basically what I did for my dissertation is I interviewed 8 professional game developers. I think about 6 of the 8 were college professors and CEOs of their own game-based learning company, that kind of thing. It was an awesome discussion. And so there's a number of takeaways I had from it. I can walk you through the themes if you would like. So basically, I was saying, how can you create a game that encourages the practice of analysis, the practice of evaluation, creation, critical thinking? What do you need? And so after all the interviews, this is kind of what I came up with. So there's a few themes here. The first one is context matters, right? Anytime you ask someone to play a game, whether it's a kid or whether it's adult, and it doesn't matter where they live, oftentimes they don't think they're being taken seriously, right? Especially if they're an adult. And sometimes, middle school kids, they want to be treated like an adult, so they often don't appreciate that either. So you kind of have to go into it understanding that you might have some resistance from those people that you're asking them to play games. Maybe they don't have as good of an understanding of, I'm sure they don't have as good of an understanding of you as the benefit of games and why you're doing it. So just kind of expect resistance. The next thing is, these games are really easily adaptable, right? They can be anything. They are a blank canvas, right? It's whatever you want to put on it. And if it were me, I would start with those learning goals, those skills, those tasks that you want them to do, the essential questions, as a bit of a foundation, and then you can build off of that. The first in the first theme is social demographics. So when you are, and these are people who are, you need to know who your audience is. A lot of the cultural context really matters. I spoke to one professor who was hired by, I think it was UNESCO, to create a game to help promote sustainable farming in, I believe it was Afghanistan, Pakistan, one of those two. So when you go into that situation, there's a context you need to understand. There are social norms that you need to understand. There are social things that if you try to do, right? Even if you and I, for example, think that, we believe in equality between men and women, of course, right? That said, if you're building a game for these male Afghan farmers and you try and bring women into the game, like you and I can know that that shouldn't be a problem. But if that
Mhm.
means they're not going to learn about sustainable farming, then you have to change that game
Yeah.
because the goal has not been met. Even if we know it's wrong. So that's one thing that really need to take into context who you're speaking to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It seems that you come up against a clash between purpose, the game design, and so-called ethics, like what's right, what's wrong.
Right.
Mhm.
How do you mitigate these two factors?
All right. So the second one was ethics, and the first one was, what did you say? I'm sorry.
The purpose of the game design.
Purpose. So yeah. So you start with the goal. You start with what you want the end product to be, right? What do you want them to take away from it? And I think from there you build out. From there you build out the social context. Who are we working with? Who are the learners? What are the non-negotiables for these learners, right? So I think you start with a purpose and then you build out. But certainly ethics, just like cultural understanding, is something you need to be aware of. Otherwise, your game, it might be a total waste of time.
Mm-hmm.
So I can continue with these themes if you'd like.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
It's
All right.
very interesting.
So the second theme that I have is what's your problem, is what I call it, right? What's the narrative? What's the learning objective? What's your stated problem, right? Where are we? What's our starting point here? All right, what are we trying to solve? What are we trying to do? This is really how you're going to capture people. And if they think it's worthwhile, if they think it's, worth their time or whatever, this is when that's going to happen. And the next part of that is practical application. What are you going to get from this? Why is this worth your time? And that's one thing in education that, why are we doing this? And I think some people take that as a rude question, but for me, it's like, these kids are here 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 180 days. They should know that is a totally reasonable question to ask. Why am I doing this? And you should know. And as an educator, if you don't know, I think that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So to continue these themes, the next one was agency, right? One of the great things about game-based learning is that you can encourage kids to take risks in a risk-free environment. Right? So they can fail the game. They might be duped by this whatever character you have in the game or whatever, but they're not going to lose all their money in reality because of it. Right? Hopefully they learn this lesson the easy way, which is, through game. Encourage problem solving. Right? We're going to put them in situations where we want them to analyze this. I want you to break this down into smaller parts. And then I want you to tell me which of these smaller parts is most important. Right? So we're practicing these evaluation skills. And another cool thing about games is you can just kind of inject whatever skills you want them to learn. Right? So the first game I created with a colleague was around this Chinese legend called the Dagger in the Map. Really cool. And even though the legend's cool and I love it, and it's honestly one of my favorite stories ever, that game was essentially a platform for us to teach about all sorts of different aspects of China, right? So the Confucianism that the people abided by in the courts, the Great Wall of China, the punishment system, legalism, Qin Shi Huangdi, the guy who united China, the period of warring states, all these things, all these, a game isn't me talking at my students about these awesome topics. It's more them exploring these awesome topics while we are guiding them through, or to this place or to this goal.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about games, I mean, I could talk forever about games, honestly, but just to kind of simplify it, compared to traditional teaching methods, games consistently offer higher levels of engagement, higher levels of motivation, higher levels of collaboration, skill skill acquisition goes up because your mental plasticity goes up, right? But you know, like I said, collaboration goes up, but you could change the game so you're focusing on leadership skills, or you're focusing on resilience training, or you're focusing on, working through ambiguity or uncertainty or whatever. It's I Part of the reason I love it so much is it could be anything. It could be, whatever you need. There's so many different needs across the country and across the world, and like we can make games to forge these skills and to practice these tasks. So it's so cool.
Can you tell us, it sounds so cool. I'm like, my wheels are just turning right now. Trying to think about, I just want to hear so much more. Okay. So can you tell us about like, maybe it's this game, the game that you were talking about with learning about China. But I'm curious how that game-based learning started. Like, how did the kids interact with it? How was it pushing them to those higher orders of thinking? Like, what does that look like in the classroom?
Sure. So what it might be is, there's all sorts of different scenarios. So I'll give you a scenario that I did, that I stole from one of my colleagues, but I did it in one of my class. And essentially what it was kind of like disaster training. So what we did is, we were in Switzerland at the time, and our kids know all about skiing and avalanches. They had to go skiing and snowboarding every Tuesday or Thursday in the winter. So what we did, knowing that they had some backgrounds in avalanches and in snow, we set up like a crisis center, and our students were the crisis center. We put up the scenario: hey, the Nepalese government has hired you all. Right? Specifically, we're in Kathmandu right now, and they are having a lot of problems with avalanches. Okay, so as you might know about Nepal, it doesn't have as much money as Switzerland, but they may have similar problems. So as a class, we went through, what Switzerland does to stop avalanches. We went through what Chile does to stop avalanches. We went through, what Austria does, what Colorado does, whatever. And then, given the fact that we have more difficulties, we don't have as much money, whatever, however you want to make it more difficult, you all need to come to a conclusion, or, you can have several different groups. You all need to come to a conclusion as to what Kathmandu should do. Now, another cool part of this is that there's no right answer, right? So we want, like I said, I want you to analyze the situation, right? You're looking at the avalanche situation, you're looking at the money available, you're looking at the different technologies that exist. You're evaluating how they might, work in different scenarios, whether, Nepal has, I don't know, the snow's heavier or whatever, So you're kind of working through all these details, and you're coming to a conclusion. And so one thing I like to do, and this is just kind of me, I like them to come to two conclusions, just so sometimes when they come to one conclusion, they'll dig their heels into that one conclusion as it is the only conclusion. So I think oftentimes coming up with two lends itself to more better conversations and that kind of stuff.
What would you say stood out to you in the way that students engaged in that kind of an experience differently than in a traditional experience in which you're like lecturing about that stuff, or, worksheets and things like that, which is what most people would turn to?
Yeah, I mean, way more buy-in, right? The kids were excited about it. They were excited that they had the agency to make these decisions, that they could modify the technology, right? Or that they could, talk each other into it or whatever. What I said before, with the kids that were willing to spend more time than was necessary, or, they wanted to get those details right, that was really cool. It's like oftentimes in traditional classrooms, and, kids can be sluggish if it's a lecture, if it's something like that, and they were moving. they seemed like they wanted to have this discussion, not that they wanted to be right, because there was no like being right. It's, we want you to solve these problems to the best of your ability. You know, think logically, work as a team, be kind to each other, these types of things. These are the things that I'm, you know, looking for. And, you know, so to go back to one of my games before as to how my students were acting different. So the game was very similar to the movie Apocalypto, if you've ever seen Apocalypto, where it was about the interaction between the Aztecs and Hernan Cortez and his men. Well, like that happens at the end. Spoiler alert, sorry about that. But so as we were developing these games, the students took stuff and ran with it. So they, you know, decided that they wanted to make religion a bigger thing. So then they were diving into the, you know, the sun god of the Aztecs, and then they were trying to learn more because they wanted to smite their friends, you know, whatever. And it's like, I'm not pro smiting or anything, but I do love how you all are diving into this. And, you know, these are 15-year-olds who are diving into primary sources, you know, secondary sources. And it's like, you guys don't even know that you're learning. And that's the best part. I mean, I'll probably say that 100 times. There's a bunch of best parts.
Well, and that was actually making me wonder. So when you were talking about like the avalanche, for example, and you were saying you gave them examples of like all the way that avalanches were being dealt with in all these other places. Did you give them that information? Like, did you lecture that information? Did you give that to them on, you know, here's readings about it? Did they go and do their own research? Like, how did that experience go?
Right. So when I did it with my class, this was like the first time we'd done it. So I gave them little packets. However, if I were to continue doing that, I certainly would try and build up their research skills. Right. One of the things that I find problematic in classes today is oftentimes teachers will give students technology and think that's the end of it. Right. Like, oh, they're on technology, they're using their time wisely. Not necessarily. In fact, it's way more distracting than just, you know, sitting with a book open. So, yeah, that time, because their skills weren't polished yet, I gave them some information. But as the year wore on, you know, we developed better source analysis skills, right? So they look at a source and they say, okay, what are the origins? What's the purpose of this, right? What's the content? What are the limitations in this? And they can see whether it's, you know, worth reading or not. But yeah, I would certainly try and take off the scaffolds as the year goes on if you're trying to build up those research skills or what have you.
So then in an activity like that, how long would something like that take? Like, I'm assuming that's not like a single class period, but then also some people have 2-hour class periods, other people have 55-minute class periods. So like, how long would you say an assignment like that would take for students to grapple with before you came to sort of a conclusion?
Right. I think that took 2 45-minute classes, and those were 8th and 9th graders, and they were on it. And I think the time limit helps sometimes, right? If you give them unlimited time, they'll just go forever and they'll get lost and this and that. So I think kind of limiting them in whatever way you want is helpful. So they know they can, you know, keep it simple or what have you, and with clear expectations, that makes it a bit easier.
Oh, wow, this is really very, very interesting, and I'm quite excited by what you have described.
Yeah.
Based on your description, right, how do you then distinguish between project-based learning and your game-based learning? Because it sounds similar.
Yeah. So oftentimes we do have projects within this game-based learning, right? So as far as the definitional difference, I'm not sure. I mean, I could venture a guess, but I don't want to be wrong on your podcast. So
It's okay.
So
you've been wrong before.
My understanding of game-based learning is
Many
just
times.
using games to help you learn, right? Whereas project-based learning, right, we're slowly going to develop this project together, or as an individual or as small groups, and by the end of the lesson we're going to have touched on all those different skills. I think there's a lot of crossover between the two.
Yeah.
I couldn't give you a definitive difference between the two at the moment, though.
For me, the game-based learning has a design structure whereby you have a lot of game elements from, for example, board games like Monopoly, Risk. For example, you could have prizes, you could have a league table, you could have a point system.
Right.
Yeah, so those, in my mind, what a traditional game-based learning design looks like. But it looks like for you, I don't know whether you have that layer, but on top of that, you have a storyline approach that further adds to the excitement, the engagement of the students. If I'm correct.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think that speaks to the practical application that I was saying to before, where it's like, oh, this is kind of a realistic scenario. This makes sense, but the kids are also really willing to like buy into it. So I told them a story, this 2,000-year-old Chinese story, and they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. They want to buy into it, right? So Ghazali, what I heard you describe earlier is what I would call game mechanics. So yeah, you're right. So game-based learning has some sort of game mechanics, right? The way that you're running the game in Dungeons and Dragons, it's a certain way, and in Monopoly, it's a different way. Whatever. So yes, you're absolutely right in that regard.
I'm just curious.
Okay.
In your research, do you come across this thing called storyline approach out of Scotland, 1980s?
I've come across a lot of research that supports we use stories to change people's minds and things like that. I don't know if that's exactly what you're talking about. Could you elaborate on that?
Yep. So basically, it's how you design projects, but you use storylines to move the project along. For example, you start off with okay, you're a family of 5. You're in a village. Okay, so now design each character. So they learn about descriptive writing. They learn about characterization skills. Then suddenly something happens. Oh, a volcano erupts. So you got to find out about how volcanoes function.
Right.
The flow of lava, how fast it flows, how do you survive as a family? And then, so you're introducing problems into the stories, and then it moves along in that way. So it sounds like similar to what you're doing with the apocalypto storyline.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that kind of goes with anything, like anything I'm talking about in my history classes or whatever, always trying to have some sort of emotional impact, always trying to have something where it relates to them. They are their own favorite topic consistently, but yeah, that story drives the emotional response, which drives buy-in and a bunch of different things.
So now the issue or the problems that we sometimes come across with this storyline or game-based approaches, something about let's just call it like legitimacy. How do you sell this idea of fun lessons to schools who are preparing students for high-stake exams, for example, serious schools? So result-oriented school. Yeah. How do you sell your idea of game-based learning to these kind of schools?
Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah.
So from what I've
I know.
from what I've seen and the people I've spoken to, the schools that are more receptive are the ones that are a bit more flexible, right? So the private schools, the charter schools, and if you're homeschooled, they have even more flexibility. So I'm just kind of getting into this now, where I'm trying to do this professionally on the side. And the first group I'm going to work with, I have a meeting with them next week, is students that are homeschooled. And basically my pitch is going to be something I said to you earlier, where it's like, I would like to create games, or we can play games, it doesn't matter. But the point of these games is that we're going to target whichever skills, whichever tasks that you want these students to learn, we're going to inject that into the game, right? We can do pre-tests, we can do post-tests. The more statistics that I can get to support, that this is actually improving analysis, evaluation, creation, these types of things, that's when we're going to get those high stakes places to buy in. But I think absent that, it's not going to happen, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
too much risk in those high flying schools. I think it's going to take a lot to, you know, change their mind, or at least kind of change the direction somewhat.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, because of these high stake exams, right? So and our traditional methods of teaching, drill and practice is just so ingrained because they do produce results as well. You can, and so they're thinking, why change? And the tediousness of coming up with a storyline that supports the lesson. Why not just produce worksheets after worksheets? And it works. So why change something that works? So that's why it's an uphill battle, because we know game-based lessons and design have been around for quite some time, but it takes a long time to penetrate into the mainstream education system per se. How did you find the situation between like Korea, Switzerland, and now in the US in terms of this acceptance of the methodology?
I think Korea is going to be the last to accept it. I think, you know, from what
That,
I've seen,
that was my ranking list, yes.
from what
Because they're
I've
very similar to Singapore.
seen, like that tried and true. And from the students I've worked with there, they work hard too, right? So it works. However, you know, it's one of those things where, okay, now, yeah, maybe it's not, you know, maybe we can't convince these schools now, but with all the research there is, with all the information on the benefits of games, it will get there. You know, like guns, for example, were not useful when they were first invented, right? Arrows, whatever, it was way more efficient. It took minutes to reload these guns, and then it might go off anyways, and then you might miss, and blah, 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 blah. But over the years, there are so many innovations, so many ways to improve it and to rifle it and to change it this way and this way and this way. So it just slowly gets better over time. Whereas, you know, now we see it's like, oh, of course, like, you know, these are so useful, whatever. Whereas when it came out in 800 CE in China or whatever it was, I think it was originally made for fireworks and it made a really loud boom. But other than that, not really practical. But we keep working with it and we make it better. And we know what we're looking for. We know that it works, but we just need to figure out how. And I'm happy to share the rest of my themes that for the basically what it takes if you want to add higher order thinking skills into your games.
Yes, go ahead.
All right, here we go. All right, so this next part was specifically about how to incorporate higher order thinking skills into your game. Sorry, I just ran over my dog's foot. So the first thing is you need a sufficient system. And by that, I mean like an ecosystem of the game, right? It doesn't need to be particularly complex or anything like that. It just needs to work. Like, for example, chess is not particularly complicated. There aren't many moves that each individual piece can make, but all together, within, I think, 4 moves, there's billions of possibilities of what you could have done.
Mm-hmm.
It's a system that works well together. So some sort of ecosystem or sufficient system that works. The next part was unnecessary obstacles. So think of like golf, right? Golf would be really easy if you just picked up that ball and put it in the cup. But no, we're going to make you hit it with a stick. We're going to have grass with different thicknesses. We're going to put water in there. We're going to put sand in there. We're going to put whatever. And it's these unnecessary obstacles that make it fun. You know, obviously infuriating at times for those of you who have played golf, but satisfying. And it's kind of that paradox where it'll be more satisfying because it was more difficult, right? And so the next thing for how to incorporate higher order thinking skills, the best way is to give your students agency. Let them make decisions. Let them look at evidence or primary sources, whatever, analyze it, have them talk about it, evaluate it, then create something. You know, so it's put them in situations where they can make these decisions, right? In an ecosystem that works. So I have a few more themes. The next one is meaningful. The decisions that they make need to have consequences, good or bad. Okay. They need to know that this matters, what they're doing, and it should be taken seriously. Because if there are no consequences, it will not be taken seriously, right? Like, I'm sure there are tons of teachers out there, like, not threaten, but say, if you guys do this, I'm giving you homework or whatever. And then the kids figure out this threat has no teeth. So they're just going to keep doing it. So
the famous if-then statements. Yeah.
Say one more time.
Is the famous if-then statement.
Exactly. So yeah, the decisions have to have consequences, good or bad. And another thing is social reinforcement. Games are really cool opportunities to get students to work together. And you can make these, like I said, it's a blank slate. You can make it so one player, you can only win if all players win, right? You can only win if all players make it out of the pyramid alive or whatever it is. So you're kind of encouraging these people not in like a super capitalistic system, but more in a community-based kind of like we're all looking out for each other type thing. And so the last thing, one thing that I found really interesting, which I didn't expect for these themes, was I said, okay, how are you assessing these higher order thinking skills? How are you assessing analysis, evaluation, and creation? And pretty much everyone was using qualitative means, meaning that they were evaluating it using surveys and questionnaires and this type of thing. And I was a little taken aback that there weren't more widely used rubrics specifically to evaluate, this is what the evaluation process is, and you can check it off as you go, or this is the analysis rubric or what have you. So that was pretty interesting to me, and now I have a better understanding that these quantitative means of assessing higher order thinking skills is something that we need. I should also point out the whole reason I did this is I was looking at the World Economic Forum as people do, and one of the things that came out in 2023 was their future jobs report. And in this future jobs report, they have the future skills report. And the future skills report said, in the next 5 years, the top skills that our workers will need are analytical thinking, creative thinking, resilience and flexibility, and curiosity. All of these can be incorporated into games. Right? So my question was, how can we do this? Right? How can we incorporate all these things into games? How can we make sure that our students have these skills so they can get those awesome analytical jobs that they want, or whatever, right? We're trying to give them more opportunities to get what they want and build up those skills along the way.
Man, I have so many questions. Let's talk a little bit about what perception and pushback looks like with this type of thing. Because one of the things I am thinking, and is this is it's a movement, and it's going to be difficult no matter where you are to get schools to buy in to anything that's breaking from tradition, right? Like I work a lot with self-pacing, and it's hard to break into schools even with that. So it feels like this is definitely more the thing that you want to start reaching, like individual teachers, because it's individuals who are going to start leading to a bigger movement, right?
Right.
Well, what have you heard at this point in time from educators who seem to be skeptical about gamification, and how do you respond to that skepticism?
I think most of the skepticism comes from basically the way that we've set up our education system today. And most of the comments aren't that it's games don't work, not that games are silly. It's that we have this way of doing this education system, and it's not.
Yeah.
And to that, I would say yes, right? Like I said, we're making strides. it's going to get better every day. I think it's one of those things where it's going to be more and more adopted every day. Since Stranger Things, Dungeons and Dragons has become more and more popular,
Mhm.
and I think people really just want to get into it. I know the teenagers that I will be working with, they want this opportunity to be creative and, learn from doing something different, not from someone speaking at them, right? Not regurgitating facts onto a piece of paper. That's not even mentioning the fact that we're getting to a place where these facts, not that they don't matter, but these students can look them up in 1 second. So why it's those facts aren't, to me at least, what's important. It's those skills, it's the tasks that you're completing, right? Your competencies, your ability to work in ambiguity or without complete information, or to become more resilient, or to become
Mhm.
more clear, or to recognize, like, oh, I can use my leadership skills to pull in and better other people, right? Like, there's so many opportunities to better kids, better students in so many different ways. I don't know if I really answered your question there, but just
No, you are. And I mean, so I'm thinking, okay, so you're talking to two teachers here.
right.
And I'm thinking about people listening and thinking, yeah, this sounds awesome. Like
Yeah.
that's because I know that's what I'm thinking. I know I can see the look on Ghazali's face. So I know that's what he's thinking. But then I'm also thinking about how those people are sitting there going, yeah, this sounds great, but
Mhm.
where's the time to create that? Where would I begin? So how would you tell people, like, how does somebody begin with the process of, if I wanted to take a unit that I have, how can I take that and turn it in to more of a game?
Right.
We have those skills, right? You're using standards, right? So you have kind of like the things that you need.
Right.
But how would you tell somebody to begin shifting towards creating a game? If somebody did want to, like, I want to try this out, how would I do it? What would you tell me? Also, I want to do it, so tell me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
This is where you can make big bucks, Kevin, right? This is if you wrote a book on how to do this, right? You make lots of money.
all right, now the pressure's on. No, so I would start with the same way that if I was teaching, I would start with you. Start with the standards, you start with the goals, you start with the essential questions, you start with what you want these students to learn, right? And so for me, let's take that China unit that I was talking about. Basically, when I was a teacher in this one particular class, it was a history class, but my school was more concerned with the skills that they learned. So it was one of those things, they can, as long as they're learning the skills, Mr. Jennings gets to talk about whatever Mr. Jennings wants to talk about, right? So, but in this particular unit, we were talking about China, and we tried to identify what we wanted to talk about China, the period of warring states, Confucianism, legalism, Taoism, all these different things. We identified and we put it down. And then we try and find either stories or games, or we can come up with a story, or we can make a story which will cover this. And so the whole process to me is still, I'm still figuring it out, to be honest. But what I would do, and what I have done with students, is you start with all the things that you need to do, you want them to learn. Then I would get a bunch of primary and secondary sources, and I would say, all right, we need to look through all this information. I give them all the information on China that we're going to learn about the wall, about Confucianism, X, Y, and Z. All right, I want you and your group to come up with, we're going to try and break this story into 3 acts. Okay, you and your group, we're going to give you X amount of time, come back, and we're going to talk about the 3 acts to our story. And we would go over what that means and what that might look like. And so I had my students go, they talk to each other, they write a bunch of stuff down. Of course, they're citing things from the primary sources. We think, and we come back together, we talk as a group, we think this would be a cool story. This is the first act, right, where the hero leaves or whatever. The second act is on the journey. The third act is in the Qin province or whatever. And we try and come up with an idea. Usually there's some compromises, and we'll change things around. And then once we do that, we are we're going to have each group, so let's say there's 3 groups. Each group is going to write that one act. And each act will have 3, what's the word? 3 interactions, all right? 3 actions, 3 problems that they have to solve or whatever. So we kind of take this whole thing and we try and break it down smaller piece by piece by piece. And then once we have that, we can break down to the dialogue, right? Or we can have students do research into, I could say, all right, you're going to be a Confucian priest. So I want you to design a character. You 3 design this character. Make sure that it follows these Confucian, theories or policies or what have you. That it's true to Confucianism or whatever. So these kids are now diving into it. They're trying to keep up with Confucianism. Oh, what is Confucian? Are you sure? Like, so they're then developing these characters with these primary and secondary sources. And there's a lot of times where we're kind of going back through it and making sure it all works together and flows smoothly and that kind of stuff. But honestly, the process is one of those things that it is not well defined for me just yet. And writing a whole like history RPG, and it doesn't have to be history, it could be whatever you want. It's a lot. And for me, I'm still figuring it out.
Okay, so have you thought about the use of AI? Generative AI right now, you could make really awesome games, and it can actually help teachers to solve a lot of those issues or problems they may have in like designing storylines, coming up with complications, characterization, and you could also try to integrate it so that the students could use AI as part of the exploration into that world, because you could create AI characters. You could create Cortez and they could speak to him, and it just makes the game so, it's like a 3rd dimension. So is your research going that way, or are you thinking of doing that?
Yeah, so AI has helped definitely a lot with just research. So another game took place with the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. So we needed to do a lot of background knowledge on Pompeii during this time. ChatGPT, one of those things. All right, I need you to give me a list of 10 most common occupations of this time in Rome or whatever. And then we use that list to come up with our characters. And these characters in our story were just meant to be kind of like generic people in Pompeii at this time. So we had a scholar, we had a soldier, I think we had a slave, and then we had a MacGuffin. Right? I'm not sure if you're familiar with this term. It's like, I think it's an Alfred Hitchcock term, where it's just like, they don't really do anything, but they just kind of move the story along.
They're NPCs.
And yeah, they're an NPC.
Non-playable character, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But so for research, absolutely, to say, you could say, what's a common conflict or whatever, trying to come up with some sort of problem. Definitely storylines. There are so many awesome stories out there that were just, part of the inspiration was just to bring back up these games that people, I don't know, like, I don't think any of my American students had heard the story of the dagger and the map or whatever, but it's such a cool story. And there are so many, common human elements to it that it's cross-cultural and that kind of stuff. So uncovering these storylines has been really cool. AI has helped me with that. But really, I'm just kind of starting to figure out the way to use it. One of the things I'm trying to do now is using it to figure out how educational theory are compatible, and if I could use them together. If, for example, are you familiar with the VUCA?
Yep, VUCA.
Volatile, uncertain, complex, right? So if I want to add this ambiguity to my students in order to improve resilience or normalize struggle or something like that, that's great. But if I'm also using like a C3 framework, right, that the college, career, civil life framework that goes through the process of developing questions and applying concepts and tools and evaluating, that's cool, but if they don't work together, then that's a problem. So AI has been really cool as is helping me navigate what works well together, what doesn't work well together. But really, I'm pretty excited about where it's going to go.
Yeah, yeah. It's really exciting. I already can see 3 or 4 different projects that you could do. Yeah, I'm good at giving people work to do. So you could, based on your knowledge, right, you could design a chatbot, for teachers where they just key in what the common core or the rubrics for assessment. And then the chatbot will just spit out, okay, these are the storylines. These are Act 1, Act 2, Act 3.
Yeah.
These are the things that you look out for in your students to test them out, and then the teachers can just run with it, So
And
that's a cool possibility.
yeah, and you can say, all right, now I want you to add more instances where my students have to evaluate. I want my students add more instances where my students have to work together. Add more instances where, whatever. It's awesome.
Yeah, not just that. You could say make the degree of difficulty greater for different groups.
Yes.
Then you have differentiated instruction.
Yes, and they wouldn't know either.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm seeing there's a lot of potential here, and maybe if I can steer you like a guided missile towards a particular area. One of the problems that AI is facing right now, there's a lot of blowback in the sense that there was one recent paper came out from MIT that stated the use of AI by students reduces cognitive ability or something to that effect. But I see that if you use AI in the approach of your methodology, which is a game-based learning for higher order thinking, it can actually, could you help debunk that paper, please?
So if I'm thinking of the same paper, I think it said it turns users' brains into applesauce. I think is what it said.
Yep.
Because they are not doing a lot of the things that, because they're using AI and ChatGPT, they are not doing those analysis. They're not evaluating. They're not, a lot of the whole process of research and kind of understanding how things work together and apply together, whatever. They're not going through that struggle. And my assumption is that's why it's happening, why, neural connections or whatever it was reduced. But
which you provide a solution for.
Could I provide a solution? I mean, to me, it's targeting these skills, which is the whole reason to do it to begin with, right? We are trying to forge these within students so that they're better off in the future. And when they come across a situation where they don't have all the facts, it's okay. They're not going to freak out. They've been through this before, right? So.
Yeah, because the list of items that you listed from the World Economic Forum, right? Those skills, those are a result, almost directly a result of AI changing the world of work in the future, which forces you to need to adapt, need to be creative, need to be critical. Yeah, so we have no choice. We have to integrate AI in education, but problem is how to do it the right way, that assists the learning rather than causes cognitive atrophy. Now, there's even a term called cognitive atrophy. You use AI, you become dumber, right? So, but through your approach where you motivate the students with a game-based design and you use AI for the research aspect, the analytical aspect, the creative aspect, it can actually boost mental cognition, don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, so all the research, I mean, not all the research, but there's tons and tons and tons of research for games about how they're, increasing engagement, motivation, collaboration. They're more fun. They are these primal instincts that we have, right? So soccer, hockey, basketball, as far as I understand it, these are all hunting games, right? You're working with your team to fire this projectile at that target. And not only that, we're trying to do it better hunters than the other group of hunters over there, right? So these are all kind of primal things that really just kind of get our gears going. But yeah, the evidence there that games are really, it's not the only solution, but this is one of the tools that we have if we want to improve these skills within our students. And I think as educators, it's worth us at least exploring it, even if today, we wouldn't have too many high flying high schools or colleges or whatever that want to adopt it because they don't want to change and they have a good thing going. So why would they want to risk it?
Yeah, precisely. And this is one way you could actually make your games truly multimodal, because you could have text to image, text to video. You could have your students talking to actual characters. And you really, I think, will boost the engagement level even
And
further with it.
those characters, right? So there are programs where, let's say I was teaching about China. I can upload all the information to this NPC, and they know the answers, and they can respond to the answers.
Yep.
And so it's kind of like a tutor. It's kind of
Yep.
like a character, and it's exciting that you can talk to Genghis Khan or whoever it is in your game.
Yeah.
But that motivation is going to make it so these kids are spending more time on it. And maybe talking to these characters, they'll be less embarrassed to ask a stupid question or something like that.
Yeah, and they will be even more creative. They want to explore.
Yeah.
They've asked Genghis Khan why he decided to conquer the world, and then you get interesting responses.
Right.
Yeah. So one of the sites, just for our listeners, if you want to do that, you can go to this site called character.ai, okay, or janitor.ai, I think. Yeah, those are the sites which allows you to create characters using artificial intelligence. Yeah, but they are not without their, how should I put it, controversy as well, because they are so engaging that students spend so much time on that site.
Right.
Then you have the screen time issues. So I guess it's all finding the right balance, which will be your job to do, which I'm glad that you're doing it.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to take it on. It's one of those things where, just like my students, because I love it, it's not, I love education, love games, and together I'm willing to spend a lot more time on it than something I didn't love,
Yep.
Are you open to collaborations with other schools or even with modern classroom projects or other institutions to do gamification?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've spoken to Rob about it many times. Rob's my buddy. Rob is one of the most impressive human beings on the planet that I've met, just so you all know. But absolutely open to collaboration and meeting with other educators, all of it. Yeah.
Incredible. Kevin, before we wrap things up, do you have any final thoughts or, takeaways for educators who are curious but maybe hesitant about trying game-based learning in their classrooms?
Sure. Yeah. I would say maybe before you do it in the classroom, if you want to join a Dungeons and Dragons group or something like that, and I would imagine that it'll come to you pretty quick how to use this in your class. How to use scenarios in your class, right? From that you might see in RPGs, like how can you get those emotions flowing? We talked about stories before, and that's one of the ways. So yeah, I'd encourage educators, maybe not at first do it in the classroom, join a D&D group, see if that kind of thing is for you, tabletop RPGs. Yeah, tons of ways that you can incorporate the classroom. Hopefully you'll fall in love with it the way I fell in love with it.
Yeah, and get Kevin's book when it comes out.
Yeah. Yeah, coming in 2027. We'll let you know.
Tell me if you need a co-writer, okay?
Yeah, we'll do.
Awesome, Kevin. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We will definitely have to bring you back on for another episode down the road to get a follow-up on how things are going and, what you've learned even in that time. So just thanks so much for being here, sharing your experiences, sharing your research and your expertise with us and with our listeners. This was extremely valuable time. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, guys. And thanks for having these conversations about different aspects of education. It's awesome, man. And we need everyone in the educational world to, keep these conversations up, stay in education, etc.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Listen to him. He knows what he's talking about. He's done research on that. Okay. Keep up on your pedagogy.
Yep. Agreed.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And to our listeners, if you are enjoying Teachers Talking, please remember to subscribe, leave us a review, share it with fellow educators. New episodes drop every other Monday. And if you would like to be a guest on Teachers Talking, you can sign up using the form in our show notes. Remember that you don't need to be an expert about anything, just passionate about education with stories to share. So thank you, Ghazali. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, listeners. And until next time, thanks for listening and keep on teaching.